These are some of the most disturbing crimes that happen in the Super Smash Bros. Community, and as the video goes on, each case will get significantly worse. It's the 2nd of June 2020. Kenton Hardy King, a 29-year-old player, loved to compete regularly at Smash Bros. Tournaments under the name K-Money. But what no one knew at the time was that Kenton had dark, secret fantasies about dominating a much younger female, and he would soon have an opportunity to act on them. His plan was in full swing when he hopped onto a chatting platform called Omegle. On the same day, a 15-year-old girl who we'll call Hannah also logged into Omegle, with the hope of meeting new people and passing time. Now, the person she eventually met on the other side of the screen was Kenton, and the two instantly clicked. Now, he quickly got her phone number, and the pair began to exchange text messages on a platform called TextNow, and things between them escalated pretty quickly. Their messages were flirtatious. Hannah even sent explicit images to Kenton, and what started as something small began to turn into more. And somewhere along the line, Kenton told Hannah something that would ring alarm bells in any adult's head. He said that he owns her, and he asked her to meet up with him. Now, young Hannah failed to recognize the warning signs and even agreed to meet him in person that same day. So Kenton actually picked her up and drove her to his house. And sadly, this would turn out to be the worst mistake of her life. During their brief meeting, Kenton took advantage of Hannah and filmed explicit photos and videos of her. And then when he was done, he simply took her back to her parents' house and called it a day. However, the nightmare continued the next morning when Kenton began to threaten Hannah with the photos and videos he'd taken during the encounter at his house. Kenton ordered Hannah to earn money for him by selling herself, or else he would send her pictures to her friends and family. He also created a Tinder account and threatened to sell her photos on the platform if she didn't meet his demands. Now, Kenton set a deadline, June 9th, and Hannah was expected to send him $200 if she didn't want him to go through with his threats. Now, on June 4th though, just 2 days after the encounter, Hannah eventually spoke out, and her mother reported the case to the Henderson police station. Hannah even consented to a search of her cell phone, and officers found the text messages between her and Kenton, as well as the photos and videos he'd sent the previous days. And so officers also obtained Kenton's phone number and location. Now, the next day, officers visited Kenton's home, but only found his roommates there. But fortunately, Kenton arrived shortly after, allowing the officers to speak to him privately in his garage about Hannah's report. Now, during their conversation, one officer called the number that Hannah gave them, and Kenton's phone of course rang, confirming that he was the one who really sent those messages. Now, following this discovery, the officers prepared a search warrant for Kenton's home and cell phone, and the warrant was served within 102 days after the garage visit. Now, Kenton was arrested shortly after the warrant was served on multiple charges, including distribution of explicit content, luring, and blackmail, amongst other counts of crimes committed against a younger person. Now, during questioning, Kenton didn't even try to deny what he'd done, because according to official reports, he admitted that it was all part of a plan to satisfy a sadomasochistic fantasy where he could be a master and have a submissive female as a love slave. Now, Kenton was indicted by a federal grand jury on December 15, 2020. Then, on December 31st, weeks after the indictment, the Vegas Ultimate Conduct Panel, which actually monitors and addresses harmful misconduct within the Vegas Smash Bros. Community, officially cut ties with Kenton. Their statement on X read, "We are announcing the immediate banning of Kenton King, known as K-Money, within the Smash Ultimate community. We want to prioritize the safety of the community and warn those who may currently or have previously maintained contact with K-Money, either at events or outside of them." Now, Kenton remained in custody for 4 entire years while awaiting trial. Now, in the actual hearings, he tried to put up a fight and tried to throw out evidence against him by filing 4 different motions in court. For the first one, Kenton claimed that the police had violated his rights by interrogating him in his garage without reading him his Miranda rights. The Miranda rights are what we often see in TV shows and movies wherein officers remind suspects that they have the right to remain silent, since their statements could be used against them in trial. This allows them to choose to have an attorney present during interrogations without being forced to make confessions. And since these rights weren't read to Kenton before his initial conversation with the officers, anything he said couldn't be used as evidence in court. And as for the second one, Kenton argued that the internet companies, Omegle and TextNow, had served as agents that illegally saved his data for the government. And since it was an official investigation, it was likely that the authorities contacted the social media companies for their cooperation on Hannah's case. But Kenton didn't see it that way. He believed that these platforms were meant to protect his data no matter what. Yet the court was able to gain access and use his private messages against him. And this, he argued, went in direct violation of the 4th Amendment, which is supposed to protect citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. Now, Kenton's third motion in court was to suppress the evidence retrieved from his cell phone. He claimed that the warrant to search his phone was too broad and vague to be admissible in court. It was kind of a desperate attempt, but not as desperate as his last motion, which was for a bill of particulars, where Kenton sought clarification on the attempted trafficking charges against him. He was essentially telling the court that he didn't understand the charges he was actually facing. But unfortunately for him, the court rejected nearly all of his arguments, finding that Kenton voluntarily spoke to officers and stayed calm throughout, that the internet companies would have kept his data for months anyway based on their normal policies, and the charges already explained what he actually did wrong. Only one of the motions was taken into consideration, and this was the one regarding his cell phone evidence. The judge actually considered his plea and set it aside from the list of evidence. However, even that exemption failed to help Kenton's defense. On June 25, 2024, after a 5-day trial, a federal jury found him guilty on all counts, and by November 2024, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison, with 10 years of probation. Now, the news even made headlines in Nevada.
Las Vegas man has been sentenced to 16 years for exploitation of a 29-year-old Kenton Hardy King met a 10-year-old girl through an online chat site called Omegle in June of 2020.
And Kenton's days as a Smash Bros player were officially over.
King's time in prison will be followed by 10 years of probation for the charges of coercion and enticement, exploitation, and possession of abuse material.
Now, Hannah of course survived the incident, but Kenton wasn't the only predator hiding in the Smash community, and the next case didn't even end with adult intervention or legal battles. It was 2016. Troy Wells, better known as Puppy in the Smash Bros community, had already been making waves in Southern Virginia's power rankings since middle school, and he was climbing the regional rankings fast. And while other kids his age were figuring out high school, Puppy was focused on one thing: competing with the best players in his region. Now, given his status as a young competitive player, he couldn't travel to tournaments alone, so Puppy had to carpool with other players, relying on whoever had space in their car and was willing to take him along. And that's how he met Cinnamon Sinpai Dunson. She was 10 years older than Puppet, and a well-known commentator who'd built a reputation for herself at multiple events. She was also engaged to another professional player. Now, the two struck a friendship during those carpool rides. At first it was casual conversation about the game and tournaments, but by spring of 2016, before the summer began, Sinpai started initiating intimate conversations with Puppet through Snapchat and Facebook. She'd actually send him something inappropriate, then wait for a response, and then convince him to delete all the messages afterwards. Now, the things started escalating between the two. Their first physical encounter happened after a tournament in the same year. The group returned to their room for the night, and everyone started playing Smash and Mario Party. And as the night went on, the adults began drinking, but Puppy of course stayed sober because he was still 4 years younger than the legal age. Now, at some point the game got more exciting, and Puppy, being the hyper person he was, jumped up and ran towards the hallway near the bathroom, laughing. And that's when Sinpai, who'd been drinking, ran after him. Then she tackled him to the ground and began to kiss him while lying on top of him. Now, it lasted only about 30 seconds. Then they both got up and went back to playing games like nothing happened. But for Puppy, the moment changed everything. He developed what he thought were real feelings for Sinpai, and the encounters continued throughout the summer. They slept in the same bed most nights, and Sinpai would kiss and cuddle him. Their relationship also progressed to oral intimacy, but never went further than that. All the while, Sinpai kept telling him that they would officially begin dating once he was grown, and she made him promise never to tell anyone. And whenever he questioned the nature of their affair, she'd manipulate him into silence, telling him that their relationship had to stay secret. And Puppy actually stayed silent. But by the time summer ended, so did their relationship. Sinpai actually got a new boyfriend, but Puppy still remained in the picture because he had to see her at tournaments. And worse, he was often forced to play doubles with both Sinpai and her new boyfriend. Now, Puppy would actually show bad manners in every set by performing poorly on purpose, using offensive language, and quitting angrily mid-game. And for 4 years, the nature of the relationship were just rumors in the community. There were stories about Sinpai and Puppy circulating as early as 2016, but both denied them at the time. The truth actually stayed buried until 4 years later, on July 1st, 2020. That's when Puppy, now 18, published a statement on Twitter, confirming everything. He detailed all the manipulation, the intimate encounters, and how it took a toll on him emotionally and psychologically. And the response was immediate. Within 24 hours, the 2G Gaming Panel, one of the premier tournament organizers in Southern California, banned Sinpai from all future events. And on top of that, a video compilation surfaced showcasing Sinpai's behavior towards Puppy during tournaments. It showed the way she held his hands, for example. And the footage had always been public, but Puppy's statement now recontextualized basically everything. And it turned out Puppy wasn't Sinpai's only victim. Others actually also came forward. Zephyr, another Smash player in the community, brought up his own allegations about Sinpai. He claimed that Sinpai touched him inappropriately without his consent and took advantage of his kindness by making advances on him. Then there was also her ex-boyfriend, who went by the alias Glyph Money. Now, according to him, a year before she targeted Puppy, in 2015, Glyph Money was already experiencing her manipulation. In his tweet longer statement, he described how Senpai openly brags about performing stuff on 2 members of their local scene, and she later cheated on him with a Smash player named Archie and someone named Black Yoshi. Now after Pape's statement went public, Senpai disappeared from social media completely. But then 10 months later, on May 1st, 2021, she decided to finally break her silence. She actually released a statement of her own, accompanied by legal documents from a law firm. It was basically a cease and desist order, and Senpai denied that she'd ever forced anyone into anything. She also added, "I've never consented to or asked anyone to wait until I'm blackout drunk, vomiting and unconscious to put their body parts anywhere inside of or on me in any way." She also attributed her behavior to her own trauma. According to Senpai, a 40-year-old man had allegedly lured and forced himself on her while she was intoxicated. And under this premise, she stated that she didn't deserve what was happening to her and asked people to stop telling her to leave this earth because she'd been receiving death threats as well. She also said that she decided to not listen to their hateful words so she could help people like her who'd experienced trauma, though she didn't actually explain how. Now in everything she wrote, one thing was missing: an apology or even acknowledgement of what she'd done to Pape. But a new development sprung up about 10 months later. On March 11th, 2022, Senpai returned with a second statement, and this time she went on the offense. She exposed the 40-year-old man she'd mentioned in her initial statement as Zephyr, one of her accusers. Senpai claimed that Zephyr's real name is John Breeden and alleged that he was a predator himself. According to her, "John lured me, Pape, and 5 other men from our region to his house to have sleepovers so he could get me drunk." She also said, "Multiple people, including Pape, witnessed John pick me up and carry my body into his bedroom. I was barely conscious when it started and quickly passed out." And in this statement, he wasn't the only villain in her story. Senpai also alleged that Pape had also been rude to her online in 2015. "My only connection to Pape was that he would constantly publicly bully and harass me in our Smash Bros Facebook group page by making fun of my appearance and playstyle." Now Senpai claimed that the insults hurt her emotionally and that she was only 23 at the time. She stated that she only befriended him because "I had heard rumors of his own previous traumas, something I'd also experienced, so I felt I could relate and help." But according to Senpai, the attempt to help him backfired. Pape got physical with her, especially in public, and Senpai cited one of the clips that had been circulating during the incident, saying that this was an instance of Pape hitting her in public. "In the case of the clip many people have called evidence of him trying to kiss me in a tournament video, the clip is actually him slapping me in the face." Now on the next day, March 12th, Pape backfired with a twitlong, and in his counter statement he said, "I did spend a lot of time at his house through the summer in 2016 and for a year or two after, and I never saw any instance of Zephyr being inappropriate with any of his guests, including Cinnamon." He also noted that Senpai's claim of illicit texting in 2015 was particularly confusing because the two weren't even friends that year, and the events he described took place before she'd initiated any contact with him. "Cinnamon and I did not get along for the first few months of knowing each other, and those screenshots, while rude and disrespectful, were way before any of the events I talked about occurred." And to this day, Senpai has not commented any further. She remains banned from any Smash Bros events, and her career as a commentator is of course completely over. Now Pape actually continued to compete and attend tournaments until August of 2023, when one tweet he posted changed everything. It happened on the 5th of August. Ahead of Super SmashCon that year, a member of the Smash community posted about the event's safety guidelines. Players had to wear masks, and parental supervision was compulsory for the much younger ones. And these rules were of course made to prevent the wave of misconduct that had occurred in the community back in 2020. And for some reason, Pape quote-tweeted the guidelines with a joke saying, "Well, since SmashCon didn't explicitly say that I can't intimately bother people, I know what I'll be doing." Now this was very random, and he also of course deleted it shortly after, but people still caught it, especially a user named Memphis. Memphis quickly quote-tweeted the deleted post with a caption saying, "Bro's not even joking." And he decided to attach 3 screenshots of private messages allegedly sent by Pape to a younger member of the community. Well, he wasn't actually young anymore. The first was a Snapchat message captured by photographing the screen with a second phone, and it read, "I'm so obsessed, help." And the second was a text message. Pape had been talking about playing Smash, then added a very inappropriate and suggestive sentence about what he would do to the person. "I will beep you down." And the third screenshot was another Snapchat message where Pape wrote, "Your backside is so nice." Now Memphis didn't actually disclose the victim's name, but we'll call her Jasmine. Now after the screenshots went public, Jasmine came forward herself on the same day. In a Google Doc she shared on Twitter, she confirmed that the messages were hers. And after noticing how strange Pape's text messages were, she quietly saved screenshots for months just in case. "He began making comments about my appearance, and I never really thought anything weird about it. I showed a few of my close trusted friends, and that's when I began to notice it was a little weird. Jasmine revealed that she was planning to release a statement at her own pace, but Memphis had taken the choice from her. She never actually gave him permission to post anything, but when she tried to contact him about it, he actually blocked her. Jasmine also said that since the screenshots went public, Poppy had reached out to her privately and apologized multiple times, but he himself never actually released any public statements afterwards. He simply deactivated his Twitter account and went silent. Now the SOVA Conduct Committee, which is the governing body of the Southern Virginia's competitive Smash scene, placed him under immediate suspension pending review. And then on August 9th, 2023, they made it permanent by banning him from the scene. Now the ban didn't actually stop there. Poppy's case was escalated to the Community Safety Report Panel, or CSRP, which is kind of a group that maintains a centralized list of credible misconduct allegations across the Smash community, and they assigned him the highest ban status 8, which meant that he was recommended for a global ban from all competitive games. Now Poppy's initial statement in coming forward in July of 2020 actually opened the floodgates of what was known as the #MeToo movement within the Smash community, a movement where other victims began to speak their truth about similar accidents. However, this widespread invitation created an opportunity for someone else to seek not justice but revenge, and this led to the unraveling of one of Smash Bros' most disturbing cases since inception.
Like, you guys are saying I did this on purpose, like, I just was luring these guys in, like, what?
Now the Smash Bros community was still recovering from the wave of illicit allegations that had rocked the first half of 2020. Both players, commentators, and also content creators were being called out left and right. And on July 1st, 2020, an 18-year-old player named Zachary Loth, who went by Captain Zach, decided to come forward with his own statement. Now Captain Zach was known for one thing: his use of Bayonetta, a character most players struggle to control, and by 15 he was already one of the best Bayonetta players in the scene. Now on the other side of the story was another player. This was 23-year-old Nairobi Quesada, simply known as Nairo. He was one of the greatest Smash players of all time. He'd already won multiple championships across different games and was the first player to ever beat star player 0 in a Smash 4 tournament. Now if you actually follow competitive Smash, you'd know Nairo. He had a massive following on Twitch and YouTube, and because of his standing in the scene, Nairo was able to maintain friendships with nearly every top player, and Captain Zach happened to be one of those people who got into his circle. However, their friendship was not the usual kind. Captain Zach and Nairo flirted openly on their social media accounts. Now this all started in March of 2017, weeks before CEO Dreamland, a tournament series organized by the gaming company CEO, which is short for Community Effort Orlando. Now during this time, Nairo was 20 and Captain Zach was around 5 years younger. Now before the event, both of them exchanged a series of flirtatious tweets, including one where Captain Zach referred to Nairo as his husband, and Nairo didn't even shut it down. There were even photos of Captain Zach lying on top of him on the floor. Now Nairo actually liked Captain Zach's flirty tweets and started conversations out of nowhere, but when another top player, Tweak, responded to Captain Zach's tweet, Nairo got a little bit jealous. Now their relationship was on good terms, until July 2020 came, where Captain Zach posted a detailed statement on Twitter, accusing Nairo of initiating an intimate encounter with him back in 2017, when he was still 3 years below the legal age. Now according to his account, it happened at CEO Dreamland. He was supposed to stay with Tweak that night, but Tweak actually got sick, so Captain Zach chose to crash with Nairo instead. And that night, Captain Zach claimed that he performed stuff on Nairo. Then the next day, after the tournament wrapped, they then did stuff again at an after party. Now Zach also provided Discord screenshots from right after CEO Dreamland, where he told other players what had happened with Nairo, and the timestamps matched the event dates. But the evidence didn't stop there. Captain Zach also claimed that Nairo had been paying him to stay quiet.
And other people are like, it's your fault for accepting the money. Like, what was I supposed to do? I was offered it.
And he also dropped payment receipts and screenshots of a $2,000 payment from a PayPal account under the name Kelvin Quesada, which Captain Zach claimed belonged to Nairo. Now phone call logs from July and August 2019 also confirmed that Captain Zach had been in contact with Nairo during that period, and more PayPal screenshots reveal a payment of $350 on February 24th, 2020 from a different account under the alias Jeremy Toga. Now Captain Zach actually proved that this account belonged to Nairo with a screenshot revealing his request for the money and Nairo's payment confirmation on the same day. According to Zach, Nairo had promised him ongoing financial support as long as he kept quiet about what happened, and Captain Zach then made this statement: "I'm not posting this with the intention of canceling Nairo. I simply wish to tell you the truth about what happened." Now the community's response was swift and merciless. Within hours, Nairo's esports sponsor, NRG, completely dropped him, and Twitch banned his channel, cutting off his primary source of income. Nintendo also scrubbed every video featuring him from their YouTube channel, while tournament organizers blacklisted him. His career that he built over years of grinding through tournaments and building a a massive following, pretty much vanished overnight. Now Nairo actually posted a brief apology on Twitter on the 2nd of July 2020, and it read, "I'm not making excuses. To Zach, I apologize for making you feel like you had to carry a burden all these years. I'm taking some time for self-reflection, and I'm committed to getting help." And right after sharing that post, he made all of his accounts private and pretty much disappeared from the internet entirely. But that same day, Tweak actually spoke up. Tweak, or Gavin Dempsey, was Captain Zach's childhood friend. He actually published his own statement on Twitlonger, and in it he revealed that he knew what had happened between Captain Zach and Nairo. He even said that he'd warned Captain Zach not to pursue anything intimate with Nairo that particular night. But Captain Zach didn't actually listen. Now more importantly, Tweak revealed something else. He claimed that Nairo had also begged him not to tell anyone. And for 3 months that was the end of the story. Nairo stayed gone and Captain Zach continued competing, and the community simply moved on. Until October of 2020, when everything actually flipped. Another player named Taman came forward with a Twitlonger himself. He was a close friend of Zach's, and what he revealed changed pretty much everything. According to Taman, Captain Zach had actually lied. Not about everything, but about who initiated the encounter. Taman claimed that Captain Zach had admitted to him in private that he was the one who made the first move on Nairo that night at CEO Dreamland. Nairo had been drinking when Captain Zach did stuff on him first, and Nairo was simply too intoxicated to stop what had happened. And the next day when Nairo actually sobered up, he realized what happened. He understood that he, as an adult professional player, had done something with someone way younger, and he instantly knew he had to make sure that no one else finds out about this. Now Taman actually provided screenshots of messages where Captain Zach told friends he'd initiated the encounter, and according to him, the messages showed Captain Zach planning to use what had happened to gain financial advantage over Nairo. And this act of simply blackmailing someone wasn't actually out of character for Captain Zach. He'd previously blackmailed a star player named Ali with their past relationship in early 2019, one in which Ali was 28 years old and Captain Zach 12 years younger. Now Captain Zach actually used this to instruct Ali to deliberately lose games at events like Prime Saga and Momocon as punishment for their relationship ending. Now the match fixing scandal, which was revealed through a deactivated Twitter account, eventually led to Ali's retirement from competitive Smash and Captain Zach being dropped from his organization. Now this past record, along with Taman's admissions, cast doubt on Captain Zach's account. Taman also revealed that Captain Zach was never scared of being caught because as a smaller person, he believed he was legally untouchable, and that only solidified when Nairo returned the same month with a different account. He claimed that he actually told his friend to write a vague apology, and that was what he posted in the heat of the controversy. But after months of therapy, he finally understood what had happened with Captain Zach, and Nairo started off by stating that Captain Zach's allegations were actually false. "The truth is, I was never in a relationship with Zach, nor was I ever interested in him." Now Captain Zach was also allegedly touchy with his friends, but Nairo had no interest in his advances because he was straight. "It's embarrassing to admit, but I'm very oblivious and dense to these types of things. Plus I'm straight, and everyone knows this, including Zach. That's why I never even imagined he would do something to me." Now Nairo's new perspective explained that in their first encounter, Captain Zach did stuff on him while he was asleep, and afterwards he claimed that Captain Zach blackmailed him into the second encounter the next day. "On Sunday, Zach attempted to do stuff without warning, and I rejected it, this saying that this was illegal, and that I felt disgusted about yesterday. He blackmailed me into a second encounter, which he gave up midway out of annoyance at how unwilling I was." Now Nairo claimed that Captain Zach had threatened to tweet about the encounter if he didn't comply, and that was how their second encounter eventually happened. However, rumors of what had happened between them began to circulate in May of 2019, and Nairo firmly believed that Captain Zach had actually been the source himself, because Nairo says he never told anyone. Now Nairo expressed that the case grew considerably worse by August of 2019, when Captain Zach's sponsor dropped him due to the blackmailing situation with Ali. Shortly after Captain Zach lost the sponsorship, he contacted Nairo asking him for money. Now Nairo was hesitant at first, but eventually complied after seeing proof of Captain Zach's blackmail against Ali, and recalling how Captain Zach had blackmailed him 2 years earlier, and this explained the payments Captain Zach had posted as evidence. Nairo made the 3 payments totaling $2,625 between August of 2019 and February 2020, all at Captain Zach's request, and he denied ever telling Captain Zach to actually stay quiet about their encounter. Now in response to Nairo's statements, several tournaments and organizations actually unbanned him, and supporters organized campaigns for his return, and regardless of whose account was actually accurate, Nairo's reputation was largely restored, even though depending on whose version you believe, one of them committed a serious crime. Now by November 2020, on Nairo's birthday, his supporters actually organized a surprise gathering where community members told him stories of how his streams had positively impacted their lives.
"I got immediately bombarded by tons of my old community members, like so many naifus just showed up and all wished me a happy birthday."
And then in February of 2021, Nairo announced that he'd finally reached a legal agreement with Captain Zach.
"As many of you know, I've been handling things legally in the last half year, and I want to announce now that we've reached a legal agreement. So I just want you to know that as of now, everything is fully resolved, and I am now able to move forward with my life."
And even though Nairo remained permanently banned on Twitch despite submitting an appeal, he still expressed hope about potentially streaming again and moving forward with this. Now the legal agreement was a settlement, so not a court verdict, so no criminal charges were ever filed. Now this next case is different. There was no legal settlement, just a case of a lady's statement and somebody's selective amnesia.
It was an unfortunate incident of poor judgment, harmful gossip, stereotyping, and my own weakness to not jump to your defense.
If you followed Smash Bros commentary in the early 2010s, you'd know the Ron Maingrip, or as he's called in the community, D1. He was one of the most recognizable voices in competitive Smash. D1 was smooth on the mic and respected enough that Nintendo handpicked him to commentate Super Smash Bros events. By 2016, his reputation was fully cemented. D1 actually transitioned into a strategic partnership role at Twitch, helping grow the Smash scene from the inside. He traveled to events, but at Smash the Record 2016, a major charity tournament with players from across the country, he crossed the line he'd never recover from, because that's where he met a girl named Caitlyn. It's November 11th, 2016. Caitlyn, or Katie Dominate, chose to celebrate her 18th birthday at the Smash the Record charity tournament. She arrived at the event in Orlando with her hotel group, which consisted of her friend Haley, a player named Clyde, and Jesse MVD Mason, all of whom kept a close eye on her throughout the night. Now at the after party held in the hotel ballroom, pretty much everyone danced and drank, including Caitlyn. Now according to the statement Caitlyn would later release, D1 approached her on the dance floor. They danced, and after a while, D1 held out his hand, asking her to go with him, to which Caitlyn agreed. Now he took her to a hotel room, and once inside, Caitlyn realized she had nothing with her. No ID, no phone, and no room key. She was completely alone with D1, with no way to call her friends and no way to leave without him. Now what Caitlyn remembered next came in fragments, but the picture was clear. She and D1 were engaging in full intimacy, and the next thing after that, she was violently ill and vomiting. Then she blacked out completely. Now Caitlyn woke up between 5 and 6 in the morning. She was still unclothed and alone in a hotel room she didn't recognize, and gradually she gathered what she could find of her clothes from the floor and walked out into the hallway. Now Caitlyn wandered through the hotel for 30 minutes, crying, with no idea what floor she was on or what room was actually hers. Now she eventually made it to the lobby, and a front desk clerk, a brunette woman who Caitlyn would later describe as sweet, noticed her tear-stained cheeks and disorganized clothing, and Caitlyn begged her to find her room number without actually handing her an ID, and to actually also hand her a key, and the clerk did it without hesitation. Now Caitlyn made it back to the room, showered, and tried to move on. However, the incident was far from over. The next day at the tournament venue, something had shifted in the atmosphere. People wouldn't actually look at her, but they were definitely talking behind her back. D1 had actually told people that they had an intimate encounter, and according to Caitlyn, he described her as disgusting, as someone who'd vomited all over her. And so following this incident, Caitlyn separated herself from the community as best as she could. She still attended certain Smash events with friends, all in an effort to actually move on. Now during this time, D1 never actually reached out to her to apologize, so it was difficult for Caitlyn to completely let go of the past. But 7 months later, a ray of sunshine eventually touched her life. Caitlyn started dating Smash player MVD, and eventually he learned about what happened between her and D1 at Smash the Record 2016. So MVD intervened, eager to help Caitlyn get closure. At the Evolution Championship Series, or EVO, which is an annual American esports tournament where players from around the world gather to compete, MVD sat D1 and Caitlyn down to clear the air. And what Caitlyn got from the conversation was an apology. She described herself as forced and half-hearted. For her, the words felt like they were meant to close a chapter he wanted done with, and not to acknowledge what she'd been through. Yet she still accepted it and stayed silent. But still, the whole incident and lack of closure ate at her for years. Then July 2020 arrived, and the wave of misconduct allegations I already mentioned was sweeping the community. And on the 2nd of July, Caitlyn decided to post her own handwritten allegations against D1.
I've never been brave, and I've never spoken out, but I'm hurting. I've been hurting for years, and here's my courage of coming out. You bragged, you told everyone about our intimate session, and that I was disgusting and vomited all over you, and I was someone who got passed around the community. I hate young me for silencing myself. I should have been brave. I should have been angry. I deserve closure. You should have stayed silent, not me. It never should have been me.
Now this post went live, and within hours, D1 released his own statement. However, it was a response Caitlyn never saw coming. D1 claimed that he couldn't actually remember what Caitlyn was talking about in the first place.
There are numerous accounts about what transpired at that event, and sadly that night I had zero recollection the next morning.
He said he woke up the next morning with a splitting headache and had to call the hotel cleaners to fix the messy bathroom, but that was pretty much as far as his memory served him.
I remember waking up the next morning. A smasher who will not be named came into my room and he asked what happened. I replied, I have no idea.
D1 claimed he didn't even even know they'd been intimate until MVD told him, and he denied spreading rumors and bragging to anyone.
When I heard what happened, it pained me greatly to hear, and I honestly was scared beyond belief to even speak to her since I didn't remember the story. I never bragged about her at all to anyone. This was a situation where I couldn't consent and woke up to a nightmare scenario.
But following the statement, MVD posted some screenshots on his Twitter. These screenshots were from a private DM sent just 2 weeks after Smash the record, and they revealed that D1 had known far more than he let on. MVD asked D1,
"Have you talked to Caitlyn? Because I think she's the one you need to be apologizing to be honest. Granted, alcohol was part of the equation. You should know better."
But D1 simply responded with,
"I'm good, fam. I wouldn't press the situation any further."
Now in the second screenshot, D1 reached out to MVD, hoping that they were on the same page after the incident.
"We should talk soon. Apparently I heard you still have issues with me when I thought we were good."
To which MVD responded with,
"Trying to focus on CEO and nothing more at the moment."
To which D1 concluded,
"My man, I appreciate it. I'll give you space."
Now these screenshots made one thing clear. D1 had known about the incident all along, but this little detail wasn't the only thing D1 wrote in his statement. D1 also claimed that he, MVD, and Esam, a Smash player who was also involved in the mediation efforts, had come to the conclusion that neither he nor Caitlyn were sober that night, and that neither could clearly remember what happened. His argument was that if he couldn't consent either, there couldn't be a guilty party.
I spoke to MVD and Esam prior to the initial talk and apology. When I spoke to them, we came to the conclusion that we, Katie Dominate, and myself were not sober and couldn't remember the situation. This made things extremely nebulous, as I wasn't able to consent as well.
But Esam quickly pushed back on that, saying,
"Let me be clear, I did not say what he did wasn't bad because he was drunk. I literally did not forgive him and warned others about him until he apologized to KT privately, which was years after. That is disgusting that he would say that about me and MVD."
Now the opinions weren't lining up for D1, and things got only worse when a former player named Dacia came forward with her own account. She'd left the competitive scene after a series of uncomfortable experiences with figures in the community, and D1 was at the top of her list. She described him as overly touchy and flirtatious, and said that once he stopped responding to his advances, he actually turned hostile. And so following these allegations, the 2G gaming panel banned D1 from all future events. And for a full year, D1 said nothing publicly. But then on July 15, 2021, he released a lengthy statement on Medium, complete with screenshots and chat logs, alongside a 28-minute YouTube video. D1 opened by acknowledging that his behavior had been poor and irresponsible, but maintained that the specific claims against him were actually false. His account of the night itself differed significantly from Caitlyn's. He said that the evening before the party, he'd hosted an open gathering in his hotel room. His door was wide open and players came and left freely, and when the celebrations were beginning to wind down, he headed to the hotel ballroom where he met Caitlyn.
There was an initial introduction and we started dancing soon after. This went on for about an hour to an hour and a half, and during this period we were getting relatively intimate and things began to escalate. So while inebriated and against our better judgment, we decided to make our way back to my hotel room.
Now D1 claimed that a security guard on duty had actually witnessed Caitlyn being asked by a friend whether she was sure about leaving, to which she replied that she was 18 and could make her own decisions.
After that, we left, and we were seen moving out of the ballroom and down the hallway. In his account by a non-privy third party, we're getting very physical with each other, and it was clear where the night was headed.
Now he also claimed that while he was mentally checked out, waiting for the housekeeping crew the next day, his door actually remained wide open as hotel staff and community members moved through the hall, and so he theorized that the rumors about them being intimate could have started from any of these events. The open door during the gathering, anyone who saw them leave the ballroom together, or the cleaning crew who came through on Sunday morning. Now on the apology Caitlyn had deemed inadequate, D1 made one stunning admission. He said that he'd apologized under the assumption that she simply wanted acknowledgement of their encounter, but what he eventually perceived was that she actually wanted him to acknowledge that he'd failed to defend her against the rumors. He said that he realized this perspective much later. Now D1 addressed Dacia directly as well, by revealing that they were actually good friends, and to prove that, he shared screenshots of her wearing a shirt that she'd taken from his room. He also posted chat logs claiming that she'd initiated advances on him, not the other way around. Now D1 did acknowledge that there was one uncomfortable night at Paragon LA 2015, but his account positioned Dacia as the one who had come to his room uninvited and pushed for a relationship that he wasn't actually willing to commit to. Now he further claimed that he tried to get her to leave, but she didn't actually take the hit. He then reached out to her immediately afterwards to clear the air. Now the day after the Medium statement went live, a woman named Seshi came forward with her own account, and she described being in a rideshare with D1 while he was drunk, during which he repeatedly tried to kiss her despite her telling him that she had a partner. They eventually argued and D1 apologized, and she accepted it, and she made it clear that she wasn't coming forward because of the original 2020 wave, but because D1 actually appeared to be preparing a comeback. Now as of this moment, D1 has not publicly addressed Seshi's account, and no criminal charges were filed. D1 himself never returned to the commentary booth, though he still has a bit of social media presence on Twitch, YouTube, and X. Now D1 hid behind a blank memory and never faced real consequences for it. The next person, however, remembered everything. In fact, he actually published it himself, and the way it came out had never been seen before.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Do it, Sfeo. It's okay. It's okay. You're ugly. You're ugly. You're ugly. Hey, you're ugly. You're ugly. Hey, you're ugly.
Richard King Jr., also known as Keitaro, had built one of the most well-rounded careers in competitive Smash. He was ranked among the best Falco players in the world during the Brawl and Smash 4 eras, and he often commentated alongside D1 at tournaments. But everything changed thanks to one incident in June of 2018. During this time, 30-year-old Keitaro and a young girl named Sandy, who went by the nickname Shiva in the community, had agreed to team up at an upcoming event called 2GG Hyrule Saga. It was a national Super Smash Bros. Tournament held in Long Beach, California on July 23rd and 24th, 2018. Now to prepare, Keitaro invited her to practice at Sky House, which is a house in California owned by Smash player Sky Williams. Now most Smash players rent rooms in the building during this time, and Keitaro had been staying there the week before the tournament. Now when he reached out, he told Shiva that there were people playing Smash at Sky House. Now Shiva was reluctant because of the apparent company, and as a result, Keitaro suggested that they could always practice another day or at the event itself. But 5 hours later, she texted him for the address. But Keitaro gave her a heads up, explaining that there was a party going on, so they might not be able to practice their game properly. But Shiva responded that she'd come anyway, and she arrived between 8 and 9 PM. Now bear in mind that Keitaro was 30 years old, and the person he was inviting over was still a junior in the field. Now when Shiva arrived, Keitaro introduced her to his friends and gave her a tour of the house. Now in the living room, a group was playing a drinking game, where you take a shot if you lost the match in Smash, and intrigued, Shiva requested to give it a try. Now Keitaro actually hesitated. He asked if she'd ever been drunk before, noting her age. Now in the United States, the minimum legal drinking age is 21, and Shiva wasn't quite that. Now Keitaro knew that, but when Shiva told him that she drinks, he agreed to play against her. Now he won 4 games in a row, and as the streak went on, Shiva started getting more comfortable. According to Keitaro's account, she would actually slap him on the back each time she lost, and she even draped her legs across his thighs while they played. Still, they kept on playing as if nothing was happening. Now after the 4 rounds of games, Shiva told Keitaro that she had to take 4 shots for losing as per their game rules. But Keitaro told her that she didn't actually have to take them, but she insisted and picked up all 4 shots and downed them. Now they continued their match, but after a while, Shiva said that she wanted to go to the pool, and Keitaro agreed and gave her a shirt since she didn't have a bathing suit. And from there, things started heading somewhere else. Both of them got into the pool with the other housemates around, and everything was calm for a while, until Shiva started trying to hold Keitaro. Now he told himself it was fine, that nothing intimate would happen, and stayed in the pool, but that's exactly what would happen soon enough. Shiva began to rub her face against Keitaro's, who in turn tried to avoid her advances for a couple of minutes, before giving in, and the two then started to make out, and then things escalated further. For the record, Keitaro was sober the entire night. Now 2 years would pass, and Shiva actually told no one publicly. She decided to keep it to herself, until July 2nd, 2020, when a Twitter user named Error102R posted about the incident without her consent. Now the revelation was made directly under Captain Zach's tweet, at the exact moment when his scandal with Nairo was just breaking. It read,
"Since he has you all there, at Keitaro Time had relations with a younger player named Shiva during Hyrule Saga."
And not long after, Error added a screenshot of a private DM from Shiva confirming it. She wrote that she'd never planned to say anything, but since she'd already been outed, there was no point in hiding it. And she also added that Keitaro's housemate, Falls, knew about their affair, because Keitaro actually bragged about it to his friends. And hours later, Keitaro posted a tweet on, and he didn't actually deny it.
"So I'm going to say everything that happened. This isn't an excuse for anything. I know what I've done and there's no excuse for it, but I will come clean with all of it."
Keitaro pretty much walked through the entire night in sequence, up until the pool incident.
"I'm stupid for going along with this. Kept thinking, okay, this is happening, and shouldn't, but I'll definitely not go any further, although it was already very bad. I'm clearly an idiot for letting her drink, and being in the situation in general. Regardless of how anything happened, this was my fault. Again, I did at least want to say everything that happened. Sorry for you having to deal with this, Shiva."
And in the closing paragraphs, he said,
"I want to apologize to my community, close friends, and anyone that looked up to me. Not really sure what happens now, but clearly I will be gone for a long time, if not forever. I'm going to take this time to work on myself as a person, and confront flaws with my character that I've been neglecting for too long."
Now following his Twitter longer post, Shiva released a response, once again stating that she had no intention of bringing this issue up.
"I was never going to say anything. For 2 years I've kept my mouth shut. I've literally never told anyone about what transpired between me and Keitaro. However, someone decided to take it upon themselves to tell my story for me. Is it my fault? I think about it all the time. All I want is to be left alone. That's all I wanted from the very beginning."
Now at the end of the day, esports removed Keitaro from the organization, and 2G Gaming banned him from all future events. And Keitaro disappeared from social media right after, and he has returned to the community, but no criminal charges have been ever publicly confirmed. And all that's left of him is the record of that fateful night at the pool. Now at least Keitaro had the conscience to come clean with his crimes, but this next one did the opposite. He fought back hard, especially for allegations twice as worse than Keitaro's.
And I guess they try to like paint the picture that I try to get every girl drunk and then try to like have, you know, but
This was basically a Bill Cosby scenario 101.
yeah, exactly.
31-year-old Jason Bates, better known as Anti, in the Smash scene, had spent the better part of a decade building one of the most iconic records in the game. He was ranked 14th on the Panda Global Rankings 100, which is the ranking of the top 50 Super Smash Bros. Players as determined by a panel of community figureheads. He was also regarded as the best Mario player in the world by the time Smash 4, the fourth installment of the Smash series, had wrapped up. Now Anti was so well known that he caught the attention of the popular South Korean sports organization T1, and he became T1's first ever Smash player when he joined the organization in April of 2019. Now this development proved that he was indeed a big deal in the gaming industry, and he was riding high on his achievements, but unfortunately for him, it wouldn't last long, thanks to one sour incident. And this problem didn't stem from a future scandal, but from an event in the past, specifically 3 years prior, in 2016. Anti, who was 22 at the time, was at the 2016 Smash the Record in Orlando, another charity event, and at some point during the weekend, he actually opened Tinder, and that was where he matched with a woman called Samantha. Now Anti messaged her, and the pair quickly introduced themselves, with Anti even mentioning that he was a 22-year-old gamer. Now the minimum requirement on Tinder is 18 years old, and Samantha had listed herself as exactly that, so without giving it much thought, Anti proceeded to move the conversation away from Tinder. He told Samantha to follow him on Twitter, where they continued their discussions. Now the next day he invited her over to an event. Anti ordered her Uber, and when she arrived at the location, he introduced her to his friends, and they all partied together. Now later that night, they lodged at a hotel, where they shared an intimate session. Now Samantha stayed quiet about this encounter for years, until July 2020 came around, and the wave of allegations that I mentioned numerous times now swept through the Smash community. And in the heat of the controversies, Samantha shared her story in a private message with Shiva, the same Shiva from Keitaro's story. Now she asked to remain anonymous, as she didn't want anything to be traced back to her. And with Samantha's consent, Shiva shared the screenshots of the conversation on her Twitter, and it detailed everything that had happened from the moment Samantha matched with Anti to their first ever meeting.
I had matched with Anti on Tinder. At one point he told me to follow him on Twitter and we began talking, and eventually he bought me an Uber to come see him and party with his friends.
But in addition to that, there were other shocking revelations. It turned out that Samantha didn't meet the guidelines to actually be on Tinder, and there was also a 7-year gap between her and Anti, and that wasn't all. According to what she wrote to Shiva, Anti knew about this. Samantha wrote that at some point during their time together, she actually came clean about her real age, and Anti responded by urging her to lie about it.
Eventually I came out and told my age, and he just told me to tell everyone that I would be an adult soon.
Now Samantha said that she actually went along with it.
I felt like I was trying to impress people since I was partying with all these Smash players.
Now Samantha saw them as people with followings and sponsorships, and lying about her age felt like a good price to pay. She described spending a significant amount of time with Anti and other Smash players like Keitaro and D1, even going as far as having intimate sessions with them. Now whenever any one of them came to her city or close to it, she would show up to the event, and they all stayed in contact for a few years, before the communication eventually faded. Now Samantha shared the story, along with a photo of her and Anti to prove that she wasn't lying. Now she was 19 when she wrote the message to Shiva, and there were still traces of self-doubt in her head.
I'm 19 now and I still don't know in my head. I still feel like I consented in a way by putting myself in those situations.
She also acknowledged that she'd lied about her age, just because she wanted to hang out with them. And at the end of the messages, Samantha expressed that she didn't want anyone to share a video she'd sent to Shiva because it could be traceable, and she feared that these influential Smash players, or their fans, would take revenge on her somehow. Now the moment this news reached the Smash scene, T1 of course dropped Anti, and what came next shook the entire community. Anti posted a statement on Twitter hours after T1's announcement, and what he dropped wasn't an apology, but a statement titled,
"I am innocent."
In the post, he addressed Samantha's statements one at a time. He wrote that he had specifically asked Samantha her age before anything happened, and that she'd confirmed she was 18, both on Twitter and in person. And he also quoted Samantha's own words back at her, specifically the line where she admitted she'd lied about her age to impress people she was partying with. And he also dared her to release whatever video evidence she claimed to have if it could prove her case. Now his write-up kind of took an angry tone when he decided to claim that women in the Smash community had held a collective grievance against him for years.
I haven't been involved with any women from Smash for over 3 years now, and I deep down have the notion that this is an organized attack on me, since most women in this community have beef with me stemming from years back. You see it all the time. They talk their shit 24/7 on Twitter and found the perfect opportunity to ruin me, and for now, they succeeded.
Now at the end of this post, Anti maintained that he'd done no wrong, and signed off by announcing that he was actually stepping away from the community. But sadly for him, the drama didn't end after his response. An entirely different story was already on the internet. It came from an 18-year-old woman named Cassandra Ramos, who posted her own encounter with Auntie on Twitlonger. Her statement described an incident that took place sometime in 2016 or 2017, not at a tournament, but at an apartment. Now this happened right after Cassandra's parents kicked her out of the house. She moved into her partner's house on the East Coast, where she had pretty much no friends or family around. Now her parents at the time eventually kind of broke up with her, leaving her completely isolated. And during this time she came across Auntie, who invited her over to play Smash 4. Now Cassandra explained that while she hung out with him, Auntie kept making repeated attempts to kiss her with liquor in his mouth. And because she didn't say no outright, but only moved her face away, Auntie kept trying.
He seemed to insist that I drank something really strongly mixed with liquor. Holding back my terror, I tried my best to appear calm. He then mentions a show we discussed and tried to get me to Netflix and chill in his room. At that point I made it clear that I didn't want any intimate bodily contact. I was just there to play games and I was freaking out inside.
Now Cassandra revealed that she panicked and texted her ex to pick her up, and that was how she got out of the situation. Now at this point other women also shared their encounters with Auntie. For some, Auntie was the villain in their story because he blocked them on his social media platforms, and others had more detailed stories. An example is a woman named Marie, who claimed that Auntie had attacked her inappropriately at the casino floor at EVO 2017. Then another player named Knives described a night at EVO 2017 when she ended up alone with Auntie in his hotel room while the group got ready for a party. She wrote on her Twitter post,
I sat and waited while he was showering. Once he finished getting ready, he came out of the bathroom, and I recall him touching my shoulder. I immediately figured that he had the wrong idea, and I came up with a lie to get out of this room. He knew I was lying, but said I should kiss him before I left. I kissed him because I didn't know if the situation would escalate or not if I refused. I walked out of the room, hurried to the elevator, and started crying.
And Knives further disclosed that Auntie reached out to her later that night with a message.
At some point that night, Auntie messaged me expressing his disappointment, and I was eventually blocked.
Now Auntie actually responded to Knives' tweet, saying that they both drank before they got to the room and he'd only gone in for a kiss because he expected she'd be in the mood. But when she refused, he made no further attempts. Now he eventually deleted this response, along with his initial Twitlonger statement. And then by July 3rd, 2020, he posted a follow-up saying it would be wiser to contact a lawyer. And Auntie did not respond publicly to any other allegations in 2020. But then 6 months later, on January 14th, 2021, he uploaded a now deleted video that he called The Truth. In it, he apologized for his misconduct at tournaments and acknowledged that his July Twitlonger had been poorly handled. And he also admitted that he should have done more to confirm Samantha's age. And he also explained that his actions weren't actually illegal under Florida law, citing the age of consent framework, which allows adults under the age of 23 to engage in consensual activity with semi-legal people. Now, Auntie did not actually address Marie or Cassandra's account, but the entire situation calmed down after his video. Some of Auntie's accusers' posts were actually deleted, and the only details that remained were Samantha's account relayed through Shiva and Knives' allegations. So for a significant portion of the community, these accounts alone weren't enough to brand Auntie as a threat. Among them is the YouTuber known as Technicals, who was once an active player in the Smash scene. In April of 2021, 4 months after Auntie released this video, Technicals sat him down for an interview and gave him the floor to share his own side of the events. And Auntie explained his story, convincing Technicals that Auntie was only guilty of one thing.
I'm gonna be entirely candid. I think the only crime you're guilty of here is probably something along the lines of underage drinking. I hope you've learned and grown from this situation, because that kind of it causes nothing but trouble.
Yeah.
Now, no criminal charges were filed, and Auntie never returned to competitive play afterwards. He stepped away on his own terms. But this next one did something similar, but in the most unimaginable way possible.
Playing a me is a great way to get reported? Who's gonna report me?
It's April 29th, 2023. Chris Boston, known in the competitive Smash community as Wadi, was 27 years old and still an active presence in the scene. Though his track record was hard to argue with, Wadi was ranked first on the Maryland and Virginia Ultimate Power Rankings, and widely considered the best at using Mewtwo, one of the toughest Pokemon characters to master. And at his peak, he climbed as high as the 20th in the world. Now, Wadi had been engaged to Cinnamon Dunson, aka Sinpai, the same woman who got banned for inappropriate affairs in 2020. Now, their engagement was actually announced on stage at the 2GG Championship and had been a moment the community celebrated.
I never would have thought that going to tournaments would bring me the love of my life, but here we are.
But their relationship fell apart in 2019 already. And by 2023, Wadi was in a different relationship with a Smash player and Twitch streamer named Juno. Now on Twitter today, Juno identifies as a guy. However, during the events of the story, she was widely known as Wadi's girlfriend, and Wadi himself used she/her pronouns for her throughout their relationship. and that's how she'll be referred to here to reflect how things were at the time. In April of 2023, Juno shared the story of her relationship with Wadi in a tweet-longer post. According to her, she'd been at a low point in her life following a breakup with a previous partner, and the separation led to the end of their shared lease, and this consequently left Juno homeless. Now she stayed with a friend while trying to figure out where to live, and it was during this time that she sent a message to Wadi. Now Juno claimed that her friend told her that there was a chance that he'd have a crush on her, so she reached out, hoping something might develop between them. But things didn't actually go the way she hoped. From the moment they met, Juno believed he wasn't her type, and she also noticed some red flags herself, including how he viewed her as a trans woman more as a curiosity than actually a person. She got the sense that he was attracted to her body and voice, and not her, so she decided to let their connection remain within the realms of friendship. Meanwhile, Juno continued with her life, squatting with a friend while looking for permanent housing as well as a stable job, but she burned through her savings until her bank account was pretty much empty. But her consistency eventually paid off, as Juno managed to secure a job and was streaming every day. And it was around this time that Wadi waltzed back into her life. He'd asked about her streams and give her advice, and for a while their contact stayed digital. But then Wadi actually asked her out. Juno was hesitant at first, keeping in mind the red flags she'd noticed when they were friends, but she still said yes to him. Now this eventually developed into a real relationship, and in the early days she stayed with him for a couple of days before heading back to her friend's place to stream. She cleaned and helped set his desk so he could start streaming as well. But it was around this time that Wadi asked her to move in with him completely, and Juno wrote in her statement,
"My life was about to pick up, but he said he'd help me move in and have a solid set place to stay. He'd pay for my food, my bills, and he'd take care of me, and that I'd be fine."
And pulled in by those promises, Juno decided to quit her job completely and move in with him. And Juno described the arrangement in her tweet longer as,
"I was basically Wadi's 1940s housewife. I cooked for him, I cleaned for him, I got dolled up for him, and I never argued or gave him attitude ever, every day. It's what we agreed on for me living there. He streamed and made money from that, and I did arrangements and all of what I listed."
But what followed was an emotional nightmare. Juno eventually found a set of lashes in Wadi's house, and when she asked about it, Wadi simply said that they belonged to his ex, Joy, believing that they must have fallen from one of the moving boxes. But Juno would later find out from Joy that the lashes weren't hers. Now apart from that, Juno also felt like Wadi was embarrassed to be seen with her in public, so she decided to actually update their relationship status online, hoping that it would help mark her territory. But even that didn't bring much comfort. Wadi would go through everything she posted online before she put it up, which felt like less looking out for her and more like him being wary of her. And whenever he got into arguments online, Juno was the one who ended up taking the heat somehow, when the conflict really wasn't even about her. Then in one particular incident that Juno described in detail, Wadi pressured her into an act she didn't wanna do, but she went through with it despite clear hesitation and objections in the moment. And afterwards she cried in the bathroom, wondering if what just happened had been consensual at all. Now Juno later admitted in her statement that she felt inadequate in their relationship, and the hormonal medication she was on reduced her drive in bed, and combined with the exhaustion of running the household, she always wound up tired and could therefore not help fulfill Wadi's needs. Now she'd actually talked to Wadi about all these reasons early on. She told him that she was not particularly interested in doing stuff and was more drawn to affection and closeness. She also expressed how much she wanted to keep him happy, even while she was terrified of what would happen if she didn't, because she had nowhere to go. But in the end, her pure intentions couldn't keep them together. Just 2 weeks after Juno moved in, Wadi ended their relationship, citing her inability to be active in bed as the main problem. And the incident, she wrote, pushed her to consider leaving this earth. And what made it worse was how Wadi handled the moment. As he was walking out the door, he asked her for a hug, as if he hadn't just broken up with her. Now Juno said she came forward because she believed that what happened to her wasn't an isolated or new occurrence. In her view, Wadi had a pattern of using his status as a top-ranked player to draw on people who were vulnerable or in desperate situations. He would then make them move in to satisfy his desires and then discard them when he was done. Then Juno alleged that he'd done this to his ex Joy before, and she wrote that even people close to Wadi weren't surprised by any of it. Now Juno's tweet longer went up on July 29, 2023, about a month after Wadi had posted a photo of them publicly on social media, and his response then came out on the next day, April 30th. Wadi called Juno's allegations simply false and attributed them to bitterness over the breakup. He denied asking her to quit her job or insisting she move in, saying that those had been her own decisions and that he agreed only because he wanted to help her through a difficult time. Now Wadi also denied isolating her and being embarrassed by her in public. He pointed out how often he brought her out to tournaments and encouraged her to meet people. And as for the housewife dynamic, Wadi said that that had been the arrangement they both agreed to, and Juno had even tweeted about her housewife arc. Now the community was still processing these two competing accounts when a third statement came through, and this one was from a former competitive player named Squirk, Poppay's older brother, the same Poppay who'd pointed accusing fingers at Senpai in the 2020 allegations. Squirk opened by saying,
Waddy has been my best friend for years, and we have a lot of history.
And he also disclosed that he was the same friend who took in Juno and Joy after Waddy ended things with them.
I asked Juno not to mention my name in her post, as I didn't want to be brought into the situation. I just wanted to help a friend. I think I'm probably the only person that knows everybody involved well enough to form a full opinion on everything, and I want to do the right thing and speak about all of this.
Now Squirk had actually been cleaning up after Waddy's relationship for years. He wrote that he only posted this because of what both Juno and Waddy had put online, and then he described something that had never been publicly confirmed before.
When I was young and met Waddy, we developed a friendship, and that eventually turned romantic. He was 20 at the time. I would travel to Northern Virginia with some other people from Sova, and we would stay with other friends from the area. Waddy convinced me to be his boyfriend, and during the time we were briefly dating, we had an intimate encounter.
And according to Squirk, this relationship lasted for 3 to 4 years, before Waddy broke things off for his ex-fiancée, Sinpai. And when the Sinpai allegations broke in 2020, rumors began circulating that Waddy had also been involved with Squirk. Now Waddy had publicly denied it back then, and Squirk did the same, because Waddy was his best friend and he didn't want to see his career destroyed.
This was obviously a huge mistake. I told him I would lie for him, and I regret that a lot, especially knowing that other people were hurt by him after what happened to me.
Squirk felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, because he believed that Juno and Joy wouldn't have experienced Waddy's habit of taking advantage of people if he simply spoke up. And at the end of his post he said,
I eventually moved on, and honestly it's not something that has affected me a ton as an adult. I'm 23 now, and it happened a long time ago. I don't feel super traumatized by it in any way, but after seeing a pattern of speaking with other exes of his, I realized that he took advantage of my innocence. It seems awfully familiar to what happened with Juno. It also seems to me like there's a pattern to his dating with people much younger than him.
Now Squirk's primary reason for posting this was not to seek punishment, but to illustrate a pattern and to stay behind Juno.
I believe Juno, and I think it's very important to support victims at a time like this.
Now, as I mentioned, Squirk is Puppey's older brother, and both Puppey and Sinpai had actually shared an inappropriate history from the summer of 2016. The woman who preyed on Puppey had almost been alive with the man who had allegedly done the same thing to Squirk himself. Now Squirk also shared some old screenshots from November of 2016 to show a conversation between him and Waddy from when he was way younger. In one exchange, Waddy made his intentions clear. He wrote that Sinpai had told him Squirk had a crush on him, and Waddy expressed that he was willing to give it a shot.
Look, I'm just saying if you want to talk about it you can, cause I'm honestly down to try whatever. What does that mean? I'm open to try a relationship.
Now these messages had been before Sinpai and Waddy had even started dating, and in a separate chat log, Squirk confronted Waddy after finding out from a friend that Waddy had been telling people that he couldn't see himself dating Squirk. He'd been leading him on in private while rejecting the idea publicly. Now Waddy apologized and asked to remain friends, and Squirk had actually been a faithful friend till the end, even going as far as defending Waddy when Sinpai's case almost implicated him as an accomplice. Now no one can say for certain whether Waddy knew what Sinpai was doing to Puppey at the time. However, both incidents with Puppey and Squirk unfolded roughly around the same time in a similar scene, and with everything now public, the community waited for Waddy to respond. However, nothing came from him. There was no reaction to Squirk's tweet longer. Instead, Waddy simply deactivated his social media accounts and went silent. No statements were made addressing the timeline of his relationship with Squirk or the text message screenshots Squirk had posted. But this time, no major tournament organization issued a formal ban, and Juno never received a response that directly addressed what she described. Waddy simply deleted his accounts and vanished the second the screenshots dropped. He left no response and no accountability whatsoever. Now imagine someone doing the opposite by confusing the community with admissions and denials at the same time. Well, that's what the next person did, and you will not believe the outcome.
I have never received explicit images from any underage individual. I have never sent explicit images to any underage individual. Anything you may have heard or seen that suggests otherwise is a lie.
Gonzalo Barrios, who went by the gamertag Zero, dominated Super Smash Bros. For years. From November 2014 to October 2015, he won 56 consecutive tournaments, taking home titles at major events like EVO 2015 and the Big House 5. He ranked first on every Panda global rankings until January 2018 as well. So Zero pretty much stood at the top of competitive gaming with over 1 million subscribers on YouTube and hundreds of thousands of followers across the social media. But in the first week of July 2020, that image collapsed completely. As July 2nd, as misconduct allegations spread through the competitive Smash scene, like almost every other case we've dealt with, Zero decided to play the role of the community's conscience by speaking up against Smash players who were implicated. He also published a statement titled My Story, where he talked about 3 accused people he knew: Keitaro, D1, and Nairo. Now Zero expressed shock at their true characters, described himself as antisocial and introverted, and said he'd missed the red flags. He also apologized for not intervening and positioned himself as an ally to the victims. Now the community praised the statement, but it only lasted about 24 hours. hours, before a woman named Jacqueline Jisoo Cho turned everything Zero had written into evidence of hypocrisy. Jisoo, an artist from Sky House, which is an apartment owned and rented out by Smash player Sky Williams, as already mentioned, quote tweeted,
"You were showing me explicit Craigslist ads of pleasure workers and explicit anime on the big screen, and constantly making advances at me at the Sky House when I was young."
Now Zero responded not with a brief denial, but actually with a full Google document, and he brought screenshots to highlight some inconsistencies with Jisoo's claims. First, he tried to recreate a setting and timeline that had not involved Jisoo, when she was just still a junior. He also included screenshots of an American Airlines travel itinerary to establish exactly when he was present in the Sky House, links to videos documenting the houses themselves, and a detailed timeline of his movements across the residences. And to counter any allegation of a close and potentially inappropriate dynamic between himself and Jisoo, Zero presented screenshots of their online interactions through 2016, and these were conversations where Jisoo had referred to him by nicknames like Burrito and Honey Buns, asking him to promote her artwork, and even reached out to request his help judging a combo for a giveaway at TwitchCon, an annual convention for Twitch users. Now Zero went even further by including a statement from his girlfriend Vanessa, who described her perception of Zero's relationship with Jisoo as a brother-sister dynamic. She'd even met Jisoo at tournaments and saw nothing troubling in their interactions. And the statement continued by noting the structure of Sky House itself. In Zero's view, this setting made Jisoo's allegations logically just impossible. The room housed 5 people, and there was practically no privacy or opportunity for what she was claiming. Now he admitted looking at explicit anime content, but insisted,
"I would not be looking at it in a room full of roommates."
Now as for the Craigslist ads, he said he had no recollection of them, adding that he didn't actually regularly use the platform. And then finally, on the question of any intimate dynamic between him and Jisoo, Zero simply wrote,
"We never had any type of intimate interactions in our time interacting."
It was a really comprehensive response to Jisoo's original tweet. However, his entire defense was about to be undercut, not by Jisoo, but by someone else. And this person was Leffen, Zero's former teammate and one-time rival. Now Leffen entered the conversation with something he said he witnessed himself. At Apex 2013, back when both of them were still coming up in the competitive scene, and well before either had turned pro, Zero and a group of Japanese players had come to where other Smashers were housed. And at one point, someone brought out a laptop. And according to Leffen, Zero and 1 or 2 of the Japanese players sat on Leffen's sleeping bag and began sharing explicit images of their favorite anime characters. Now Leffen remembered being disturbed, particularly because it was happening around his belongings, although he laughed it off at the time. Now what struck Leffen enough to post about it was the specific line Zero had used in his Google document.
"This type of anime is something I do look at, but again, I would not be looking at it in a room full of roommates."
Now Leffen found this claim difficult to believe, when he personally witnessed something else. As he put in a statement,
"Simply stood out to me, since he was willing to do it in a room full of people he never met."
Now Leffen was careful to frame his intervention narrowly. According to him, he wasn't calling for Zero to be removed from the community. He said he thought highly of both Zero and Jisoo and wanted to remain friends with both.
"I didn't want to cancel Zero, or think he deserves to be, but I do think it's very important to show accountability."
Now Leffen's account had barely settled when another one appeared. It came from a woman named Katie. Now using a burner account, Katie published a twitlonger. Her opening line set the tone for everything that really followed.
"Dear Zero, all I wanted was an apology."
And then she provided a timeline between September 2013 and January 2014, when Zero was 19 and she was leagues away from that. They talked on Skype after she messaged him in his Twitch chat, and her accusations were very specific.
"I was a young girl enraptured with the idea of being friends with someone I looked up to and admired. You used me in this state to flirt, manipulate, and ask for inappropriate favors from me."
And Katie added the worst thing she could actually recall. She said he told her to perform illicit acts on herself and filmed them for her.
"The worst offense I can remember is that you asked me to perform on myself with ice and take pictures. I lied when I told you I did as you asked, and then I declined sending you pictures."
Now Katie believed Zero wanted to turn it into a habit. He wanted to create a situation where she would do his bidding every day for 2 weeks. Now there were no screenshots of that specific request because she was too embarrassed to actually document it, but Katie had 19 other screenshots of other conversations where Zero called her inappropriate pet names and spoke indecently with her. She explained that she'd remained silent for a long time, dismissing what happened to her because it wasn't as grave as other cases out there, and she felt like she wasn't worth being hurt. But she eventually realized it was important to put this behavior on the record. And while Katie's account was still spreading, Jisoo added another accusation on her Twitter account. Jisoo alleged that Zero had started dating his girlfriend Vanessa when he was 20, and when she was still 5 candle blows away from that. Now Zero published his response the next day, on July 3rd, and he opened by apologizing to the people he'd hurt, expressing that he wanted to take ownership for his mistakes. And Zero also stated,
"While the intent was not malicious on my end, I understand that the impact my actions had on others caused pain that I did not intend."
Now he did reject Jisoo's claim about Vanessa's age, explaining that Vanessa was born in 1997 and he in 1995, which meant that their age difference was 2 years, not 5. And for Katie, he claimed that he'd never met her, never exchanged graphic pictures, and also denied knowing she wasn't fully fleshed from the start. Zero claimed that he found out much later. He also addressed Katie's screenshots one at a time and called his comments shameful and gross. And from then on, he spent roughly 60% of the document talking about his traumatic childhood. He spoke about domestic violence, his father's affair that he witnessed at age 5, dropping out of school, depression, and his sister's passing. And Zero then closed the statement by announcing that he was permanently removing himself from Smash. However, the most unexpected thing then happened afterwards. 23 hours later, on July 4th, Zero collapsed and simply confessed to everything. He admitted to Katie's allegations and even another incident with someone named Laura from another country. Laura had allegedly lied about her age and told him years later, although her story didn't gain much coverage. And after he came clean, his sponsor Tempo Storm simply cut ties with him. And in their announcement they wrote,
"After initially reviewing the statements of the brave victims who stepped forward, Zero confessed to these allegations. While we appreciate Zero's transparency, we will be severing ties with him going forward."
And Facebook Gaming followed with their ban. Then Twitch permanently banned him on July 22nd and deleted his entire channel. Jisoo then published another 35-page document on July 5th, which was titled The Truth About Zero, Katie and Sky. And inside it was one screenshot that made Zero's entire defense crumble. In the chat log, Katie had written something to Zero that made clear, in her own words, exactly how old she was at the time of their conversations. Now, Zero initially claimed that he didn't know her age. However, this screenshot simply proved otherwise. It revealed that he'd known from the very beginning, and every message he'd sent her was written with that knowledge in full view. Now, Zero went radio silent afterwards, while Jisoo actually continued her campaign against Zero even into the year of 2021. She constantly tweeted,
"Love watching the quiet downfall of my enemies,"
among other emotional statements of how nobody should support or excuse the type of crimes Zero had committed. And she also hopped on live streams with journalists, sharing her story about her relationship with Zero. And in one of these live streams, Jisoo actually refuted Zero's claims that they were good friends. In her description, they were purely roommates and business acquaintances.
We were never really good friends. The messages we were sending were like, we're roommates and we live with each other and like we don't hate each other and we get along.
And she also reiterated that all she wanted was for him to be responsible for his actions.
You want to give them the chances to like actually own up, but they never do. That's why it hurts. That's why it's so much more shocking every single time.
Still during all this rampage, Zero remained off the grid. But then in March of 2021, his now ex-girlfriend Vanessa announced that he'd attempted to leave this earth. Now he eventually made a full recovery and actually returned to YouTube in November, but he retracted his confession, citing that the public could never actually hear him out. And Zero explained that he figured it was easier to apologize than to actually fight it. So he reframed his last statement as a farewell, a final message to everyone before he left this earth.
You have also probably heard of a so-called confession for my part. Simply put, this document is nothing more than a letter that I wrote during a tremendous mental breakdown.
But since he was able to survive this attempt, Zero regained his fighting spirit and was determined to set the record straight based on how he actually saw it fit. So he issued a full denial of the situation once again.
Now I need to make this very clear to everybody watching this video. I have never received explicit images from any underage individual. I have never sent explicit images to any underage individual. Anything you may have heard or seen that suggests otherwise is a lie.
But rather than step back quietly, he went on the offense. In November of 2021, Zero actually filed a lawsuit against Jisoo for defamation. And 10 months later, in November of 2022, he won. He uploaded a video on his YouTube channel titled "The Lawsuit is Over." And he also shared another document which stated that both parties acknowledged shortcomings on both sides, apologized, and agreed to move forward. The document read,
"After months of litigation, review of Mr. Barrios' evidence, and listening to Mr. Barrios' side of the story, Ms. Cho now understands that the statements she previously made about Mr. Barrios' wife, Vanessa, were not accurate. Ms. Cho apologizes for making those statements, which were not based on events witnessed by Ms. Cho."
And Jisoo actually deleted all the tweets she made against Zero. And afterwards, Zero actually started streaming again, occasionally on YouTube. And his Twitch ban was lifted on March 2025, after nearly 5 years. But he actually hasn't streamed on the platform since regaining access. But after some time, his YouTube activity dried up, and his channel no longer actually exists. And Zero's lawsuit against Jisoo was only a momentary victory. It gave him his voice and platforms back. But one issue remained unsolved, and this was Katie. Zero had once addressed Katie in his YouTube video by stating that he was looking to reach a settlement with her, but he claimed that Katie was deliberately avoiding contact with his legal team. And so as of now, no form of evidence disproved Katie's screenshots. Now the Smash community really saw an unprecedented number of crimes in 2020, ranging from famous players to commentators. But nothing hits harder than the next one, where a figure at the highest ranking possible in the community and gaming industry at large managed to make the list.
Cause this is the real dude. This is the piece of you're dealing with. This is the head of the fucking tournament that all you motherfuckers want to go to.
Joey Queller, otherwise known as Mr. Wizard, had been part of the annual American esports tournament EVO since the very beginning. Since 1996, his fingerprints have been on every version of EVO that ever ran. He actually co-founded it, built it, and eventually became its CEO. And by the time the fighting game world knew his name, EVO had already grown into the largest fighting game tournament on the planet. It spanned across competitive fighting games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, and Dragon Ball FighterZ. And Mr. Wizard was the man at the top of it all. But people who'd known Mr. Wizard from the earliest days of the arcade scene told a different story about how he got there and what he was like, where no cameras were actually rolling. One of them was Mike Watson, a prominent figure at Super Dojo, which hosted events for the fighting game community, or FGC. Now, Mike shared some of these past stories about Mr. Wizard back in 2018 in an episode of Halls of Hype, a YouTube channel covering highlights in the fighting game community. Before EVO even existed, fighting games were played in arcades, where players gathered to compete, and Mr. Wizard was a constant, well-known presence in those spaces. Now, according to Mike, he was never particularly skilled at the games themselves, but what he was obsessed with was power and control.
From the beginning of time, Wizard has always been what you call not an attention whore, but like a power monger. Like, he's garbage at video games, so that was like his only thing.
Now, Mr. Wizard also allegedly obtained keys to the arcade token machines, the lock boxes that stored the special coins, which were like substitutes for gaming access cards, and he would pocket the tokens for himself. And according to Mike, he wasn't the only one who'd quietly sold tokens on the side, but he took it further than anyone else. Mr. Wizard also allegedly recruited others to help him steal from the arcade machines across town, and he effectively turned it into a small-scale business.
You know who else was selling tokens with me? Your little buddy Mr. Wizard was doing the same. And he even took it to the next level. This kid had the keys to the machines. And you know this Jack with the keys? He even had some minions with the keys stealing tokens from him and some.
But it didn't stop there. Mike recounted how Mr. Wizard would pay young boys in arcade tokens if they made themselves bare and jump into the pool. And in the years that followed, Mr. Wizard continued to build his business within the arcade scene, but this time not through his dirty habits. He actually focused on the gaming infrastructure, and he was gradually creating and becoming one of the primary organizers of EVO's earliest tournaments, known as Battle by the Bay. Now, Mr. Wizard would serve venues, collect entry fees, and coordinate game lineups and communicate with players who traveled interstate. And by the early 2000s, Battle by the Bay was rebranded as the Evolution Championship Series of today, and Mr. Wizard became the person responsible for keeping the event running. He managed schedules and settled disputes and even oversaw logistics of the tournaments. And his role allowed the tournament to expand year after year. And these were the foundations on which Mr. Wizard's ascent was built on, and it covered his tracks from way back. Now, by the time EVO moved to Las Vegas and grew into an international event, he remained at the center of it all, attending meetings and even drawing signatures. And people like Mike Watson, who'd been part of the scene since the beginning, watched it happen. And nothing really changed until July 2nd, 2020. This is when a veteran player named Mikey Crackprawn Fam posted a tweet longer that stopped the community cold. Mikey was a victim of what Mike Watson had talked about in that YouTube channel earlier, and he confirmed that everything Mike said was true. Mikey and other young players would hang around a group of older members of the scene, and Mr. Wizard was among them. And according to Mikey, this older group made a habit of daring the younger ones to do reckless things and rewarding them with free food or arcade tokens when they complied. But Mr. Wizard was the one who took it further than that. Mikey wrote that Mr. Wizard would specifically pay young players hundreds of tokens and jump into the water hazard pools at the arcade. And Mr. Wizard was very specific about who he targeted. 99% of the time, it was younger boys. And this statement, of course, corresponded with Mike Watson's statements from 2018, but his account was way more detailed, having allegedly experienced it firsthand back in those days. And Mikey also talked about one instance where Mr. Wizard's target was not a male, but a girl who was permitted to jump in the pool with special instructions about what to do with her clothing. Now, the accounts didn't stop there. In the wake of Mikey's statement, a separate allegation surfaced, claiming that Mr. Wizard had paid a young person $20 to expose something in the bathroom, and the entire incident was then framed as a settlement of a debt. Now, both of these allegations were too serious to ignore, so EVO's official initial response came swiftly. That same day, on July 2nd, the organization announced that they'll be placing Mr. Wizard on administrative leave, pending an investigation. They acknowledged the allegations directly and stated that the behavior described, in their words,
ran counter to EVO's mission of building a safe, welcoming environment.
Now, the leave lasted less than 48 hours, but by then the damage was already spreading. Sponsors began pulling out. prominent players announced that they wouldn't compete, and one by one the people and organizations that had made EVO 2020 possible actually started walking away. 5-time EVO champion Dominique Sonic Fox McLean was among the first high-profile names to withdraw. He reported plainly,
"I cannot in good conscience participate in an event with the allegations of one of the primary hosts of said event. It just doesn't sit right with me."
And in the same manner, fighting game casters James Chen, Stefan Sejam Lyon, and Tasty Steve Scott each announced that they would not participate. And the game developers like Capcom, the makers of Street Fighter V, released a statement announcing that they would be pulling their game from the event entirely. Bandai Namco, which held Tekken 7 and Dragon Ball FighterZ, did the same. NetherRealm Studios, who produced Mortal Kombat 11, followed. And so in a single news cycle, EVO lost its most prominent titles and voices. Now several esports organizations announced that they would not send their players in, including Equinox Gaming, one of the most well-known teams in the fighting gaming scene. They focused primarily on Tekken 7 and Street Fighter V. Now Mr. Wizard posted his own statement before the end of the day, and it was a brief apology, where he stated that he'd never meant to hurt anyone and he was simply young and reckless.
"I've been growing and maturing over the past 20 years, but that doesn't excuse anything. All I've been trying to do is become a better person. Once again, I'm truly sorry."
Now he didn't actually deny what had been described, nor did he challenge the accounts. He simply apologized. But then EVO made their second statement. On July 4th, the American Independence Day, EVO announced that Mr. Wizard would no longer be involved with the organization in any capacity. They were working towards his complete separation from the company and had relieved him of all responsibilities effective immediately. Now Tony Cannon, the other co-founder, stepped in as acting CEO, and in the same statement, EVO announced the cancellation of EVO Online, which was a plan for players to compete from home over the internet due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It had been set to begin that Saturday and run through the first weekend of August, but it never actually happened. All preparations for EVO Online were stopped immediately. The badge purchases, which were entry tickets for the online tournament, were to be refunded, but the proceeds that had been promised to charity were still donated to Project Hope, a global health organization. And so in a single week, the man who'd co-built the most recognizable brand in competitive fighting games had been removed from it entirely, and the event he'd run for nearly 25 years was cancelled with it. Now no criminal charges were ever publicly filed, and the investigation EVO had promised quietly disappeared from the public. Now EVO eventually returned under new leadership, but the name Mr. Wizard never came with it. His career simply ended within a week. But this next case we're looking at nearly took a decade longer to unravel, and the person at the center of it had millions of people defending him the entire time.
I'm not happy until every aspect of godhood is like torn away, and there's only one God, and that's me.
William Peter Hjelter, better known as Leffen, is a 30-year-old Swedish professional gamer who has publicly called himself the best fighting game player in the world. He topped the charts of Super Smash Bros. Melee, a fast-paced Nintendo fighting game, defeating top players like Mewtwo King, Armada, Mango, Hungrybox, and PPMD. And that's what made the community call him the God Slayer. His trophy shelf reflects this title as well. Leffen has 2 Supernova titles, 2 Get On My Level titles, Beast 5, CEO 2015, and EVO 2018. And he's been with Team Solo Mid since 2015. Now Leffen has over 329,000 followers on Twitch, 261,000 followers on Twitter, and over 187,000 subscribers on YouTube, making him one of the most followed players in the Smash community. On paper, he's pretty much the community's crowning champion, but off paper, he's its long-running problem child. The story starts in February of 2013, when 18-year-old Leffen was handed a year-long ban from competing in Sweden. Now that detail matters, because for years, his main defense was that all he did was teenage behavior he'd grown past. But the ban didn't stem from a single incident. It came from 2 years of documented behavior. Players saved forum posts and collected testimonies from people who'd been targeted by Leffen since 2011, which was eventually put into a single compressed file called evidence.zip. And it was kind of like a school bully case file, filled with different accounts of Leffen's mischief in the past. Now for the longest time, this file was kept private, because the people behind it didn't want to publicly embarrass Leffen. They were only trying to document enough evidence to justify removing him from their seat. Now on February 9th, 2013, his existence was finally broadcast in a Smashboards post, but only part of the testimonies were released. Now Smashboards is the main online forum for the competitive Smash community, and the post was co-signed by Armada, one of the top ranked players in the world at the time. Now evidence.zip laid out 8 specific things Leffen had been doing. First, he made new players feel so unwelcome and demoralized that they stopped wanting to participate altogether. The document emphasized on how he would tell new players players that they were terrible and would scream at them while they tried to concentrate on their game. He also spread false rumors, specifically telling people that certain players were known as liars and thieves, when that simply wasn't true. Now, the document also showed how Leffen mocked people's medical conditions and disabilities and targeted them specifically to make them look weak, stupid, or incompetent in front of others. And he also took private personal information about people and stretched it into something worse than it actually was, and shared it around to damage their reputations. Now, still on the list was his habit of showing terrible sportsmanship at tournaments. He did this by constantly talking badly about people behind their backs in order to stir up drama. And he also turned people against each other. One other highlight was how often Leffen simply bullied people in person. He'd, for example, quietly manipulate situations so that specific people were left out of group trips, practice sessions, and community events. And then the excluded people never even knew why they stopped getting invited. Now, each of those 8 points came with documented examples. One of these examples involved a Swedish player named Rocky, who had a hearing disability. Now, Rocky once mentioned his condition to Leffen on Smashboards. Then, in Leffen's public response, he wrote,
"We aren't all socially disabled like you."
Now, Rocky also testified that during their first in-person interaction, Leffen teased him by mouthing words at him silently, and he expressed that it always felt like Leffen was scanning people specifically for their most vulnerable point and then used it against them.
My first interaction with him was that I told him, oh hey, I'm kind of having a really bad hearing issue. What he did in reaction to that was basically making fun of me. Like he said, oh, but can you hear this? And then he tried like mouthing words. It really always felt like he was focusing on my shortcomings as a human being.
Another target was Mike Hagar, another Swedish player in the scene. Leffen had written 2 separate public posts about him, and both were documented in evidence.zip. The first read,
"Honestly, I wouldn't take any advice from you if you were the last person on earth, since really you're terrible at everything I value, whether it be mental health, social life, Smash, school, being fit, commentary, work, or simply not being as ugly."
Now, the second tone was different in tone, but worse in content. Leffen wrote publicly that Mike placed last in team events without winning a single game, and he also mocked him by saying that he
burned himself on paprika so bad that he had to leave the tournament and his dad had to get his things.
Now, Leffen wrote that he still couldn't stop laughing about it, and these posts were written on a forum where the entire Swedish scene could see them. Now, there was also the road trip incident in 2012, where Leffen provoked a group of players who were traveling for an event, and one of them attested that Leffen went as far as
deliberately keeping me awake at night and trying to sabotage our journey. Not only did he make sure to switch on all the lights in the RV, but he also made sure to keep the volume turned up so high that when the alarms went off, no one could possibly hear it over the noise.
Now, this attitude led to physical altercations between Leffen and the group, and after this incident, Leffen would go on camera 8 years later, on July 2nd, 2020, in the heat of the misconduct wave, to claim that he'd been physically attacked by the Smash player. Leffen said that he was struck 8 times in the altercation that occurred on the trip.
I was playing Smash and he wanted to go to sleep. His alarm didn't wake him up, and took about 8 times before someone said anything, and no one really said anything.
However, multiple testimonies from people who witnessed the incident claimed that this was a lie, because the fight had involved 2 slaps at most, and had never escalated beyond that. Now, apart from that, there was the matter of Genesis 2, one of the biggest Smash tournaments in the United States. Now, Swedish players organized a road trip to attend, but Leffen wasn't actually invited because he wasn't 18 yet, and in response to that, he wrote a public post attacking the people who had excluded him, saying,
"I think that the 18 argument is horrible. I don't really see how people who failed or dropped out of school, people who have huge debts, not enough money to afford food every day, yet refuses to search for a job, and people who have declared mental illnesses are so stunningly mature."
Now, these were only samples of the dozens of documented cases in the evidence.zip, so it wasn't something that could just be easily contested. And so in response to these stories coming out, Leffen posted an apology message in March of 2013, 2 months into his ban, and in his tweet longer he said,
"I want to try to explain myself. Mind you, I'm not trying to excuse anything. The reason I started being a jerk to people in the first place was because for over 2 years now I've been suffering from serious depression, dark thoughts, and various anxiety issues."
Then he added,
"The people behind the ban have requested me to confess everything I've done, which I honestly cannot do, because I simply do not remember every little thing I've done during a time of my life that I'm trying to forget."
Still, Leffen decided to apologize to Rocky and Mike, as well as everyone he defended with his attitude. Now, Leffen served it for a year, and when he returned in early 2014, he started winning major tournaments. And by 2015, he signed with Team Solo Mid, or TSM, a top esports organization based in the US. Now, the community was still tense with Leffen's presence. However, his brand endorsements provided a solid platform that was large enough to drown out the criticisms. And over time, the issue kind of died down. Then came the summer of 2020, and Leffen entered the picture when Zero's case sprung up. the same Zero that we discussed earlier. Now he added his own stories to the ones put forward by both women, especially Jisoo, who'd accused Zero of showing her explicit anime when she was young. And rather than waiting to see whether Jisoo's claim held up, he moved quickly to publish 2 separate allegations of his own about Zero, both of which attested that Zero had shown people explicit anime in his presence. Now some concerned users told Leffen that his input could do more harm than good, since the facts weren't confirmed yet. They warned that Zero had expressed that he'd struggled with depression before the controversies even came to light, but Leffen responded that being depressed shouldn't excuse bad behavior, and so he continued his agenda against Zero. Now even when Zero took Jisoo to court, Leffen signed a sworn declaration of his own version of the events, to help her fight against Zero. Now when the truth finally came out, it was discovered that the Japanese fans were adults, who'd asked Zero for the content willingly, and that Jisoo's claims were proven in court to be false, and she was forced to take everything down she tweeted about Zero. Now at the end of the day, Leffen's allegations turned out to be false, but Leffen himself never made a comment on how he'd used his platform to push the issue. He only made a comment after Zero had attempted on his life, where he simply wished him a quick recovery from the ordeal. Now following the July 2020 things, Leffen faced another slap in the face in December of 2020, when a documentary called Metagame, which was centered around Smash players, gave some of Leffen's victims a chance to finally speak publicly. Now Rocky described his experience on camera, and others finally shared their thoughts about Leffen.
He got banned by an entire country.
His trash talk was different, to be honest. It wasn't a brotherly. He went very personal with a lot of people.
And for the first time, a wider audience was hearing what evidence.zip actually contained. And that same night, Leffen took to Twitter to dismantle the accusations. He called it a conspiracy and suggested that the footage was fabricated, and implied that evidence.zip was written by a single person during a manic episode. And according to him, that person was the professional player named Hax. Now Hax is one of the most important names in the story. He was a top player in Super Smash Bros. Melee and one of Leffen's most persistent critics. Now the pressure from Leffen's persistent Twitter posts forced Samux, the filmmaker, to censor future broadcasts, and so the parts where Rocky and other Smash players had spoken out about Leffen were cut out from the documentary. Then on June 30th of the following year, a revised metagame episode was released, and it was framed as a featured episode and contained 30 minutes of Leffen's own account, which totally discredited everything concerning evidence.zip. But in 2021, Hax released his own 2.5 long video titled Evidence.zip 2 Reupload, which was a methodical breakdown of what he believed was Leffen's deliberate manipulation of how the media covered the community. Hax argued that the media had been portraying Leffen in a positive light, and that the community was accepting that portrayal without knowing what was underneath it.
Leffen's sponsors have made it seem as though he's a cheerful and positive role model. This false narrative is amplified by interviews with other community members who know nothing about the truth either.
Hax also explained his direct involvement in the circulation of evidence.zip.
I'm the one who compiled the document with Leffen's Smashboards forum posts, which is why some people think I created evidence.zip. I didn't necessarily create evidence.zip, because other than that, I was just another person who testified.
Now this video eventually led to Hax's ban from the Smash scene in 2021, and this ban was indefinite and was signed in a document by multiple tournament organizers, who accused Hax of offenses ranging from bullying and defamation of Leffen's character. Now Hax of course fought back by submitting an appeal for another ban on Leffen in January of 2024, and around that same time he leaked all of the 2013 evidence.zip testimonies. Now prior to this, only a few accounts had been made public, but everything concerning Leffen, which had been saved, compiled and compressed, was now publicly available for anyone to read. However, this surprisingly didn't change anything. The ban appeal went nowhere, and Leffen remained in the scene, and he's still today competing and still maintains his winning streaks. And he also retained his Twitch following, sponsors and TSM contract. Meanwhile, evidence.zip is still out there, filled with named victims. Now this next person was the yardstick of petty crimes, and his sharp tongue made him a hated figure, but in a very comical way.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
It was August 3rd, 2016. The infamous gamer and streamer Dale Emmanuel Wilson, popularly known as Low Tier God, or LTG for short, had just finished issuing a public challenge to the entire Smash Bros community. He was already known for his foul mouth.
You're gonna stay on my until you die. You serve no purpose in life. Your purpose in life is to be in my stream sucking on my daily.
And for raging off mid-match when things stopped going his way.
So laggy, I can't even play. Why do bro play video? Bro, get the...
Low Tier God declared in a tweet that no one in the Smash community could beat him in a set, which is a gaming term for a series of matches. Now the statement was of course provocative and impossible to ignore, prompting the Smash player Anti to accept the challenge. But when they finally sat down to have a match, Low Tier God of course lost to Anti. He then lost his composure online and started posting insulting tweets about the game and everyone connected to it. He said,
"I didn't take you seriously and I got randomed out by a stoppy Kenny."
Then he started blocking people for hyping Anti, who he called a fraudulent coward. Now 3 years later, in 2019, LTG did something that surprised everyone who'd been watching. He actually joined the Smash scene, the very community he'd publicly mocked. Now Low Tier God wasn't immersed in the controversies that rocked the Super Smash Bros. Scene in 2020, because his own legal and personal history was a different story entirely, and it stretched back well before any gaming challenge. Low Tier God was born in South Central Los Angeles. Now based on what he has shared through streams over the years, Low Tier God grew up without a father, was bullied through school, and experienced something deeply damaging at a young age. A teacher's teenage daughter took advantage of him well before high school. By his own admission, the incident happened more than once, and he'd never went to therapy for it. And in the year 2005, LTG's behavior started reflecting in court records. He'd actually received a restraining order in connection with a domestic violence case involving his girlfriend at the time. And in the filed documents, she stated that LTG had made threats against her life. Now 3 years later, in 2008, LTG's name appeared on a second criminal record. This time it was for a felony charge for being in possession of stolen goods. And court documents also showed he served 38 days in jail. Now due to these records, stable employment became difficult, so LTG went online to start earning. His first YouTube channel launched in 2006 under the name Sparrow25, and his content revolved around short clips of himself showcasing his singing skills. Now by 2011, he actually rebranded and changed his username to Low Tier God, and now instead of singing, his focus was fighting games. Now he actually streamed Street Fighter, and his streams were loud, combative, and built entirely around his reactions to losing. He would pretty much just trash talk his opponents, then insult his viewers, and then yell at the camera when things didn't go his way. And the fighting game community noted, but not in a way he intended. He actually became somewhat of a joke instead of a threat. Now the incident that first defined him publicly became after a loss during a stream. Low Tier God stared directly into his camera and told his opponents that their life was worthless, that they deserved zero purpose, and that they should end their own existence.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
And he didn't apologize or address it, he just continued streaming afterwards. Then came the Broly Legs incident, also in 2014. Michael, otherwise known as Broly Legs, was a competitive Street Fighter player who controlled his game with his mouth because of a physical disability, and he'd actually been ranked the #1 Chun-Li player in Ultra Street Fighter 4 from 2013 to 2017. Now Low Tier God and Broly played their match online, but Low Tier God of course lost. But losing wasn't even the main story. It was what he said after and before. Before the match, LTG had mocked Broly's appearance and compared him to Krang, the shriveled villain from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then after losing the match, he called Broly a slobbering, worthless person. Now once again, Low Tier God didn't offer any apology or even retracted his statements.
I don't give a what match he posted. He's a worthless human being, worthless piece of specimen. Give a about this ugly, slobbering.
And Broly would eventually pass away in March of 2024 at the age of 35. And that was when LTG eventually commented, clarifying that his words from 2014 had been a joke.
Yeah, unfortunately, Broly Legs has passed away. My condolences to him and his family. Regardless of what idiots on the internet try to believe, I did really respect the guy. I had no ill will or beef towards him whatsoever. It was just more like a joke to me.
But this was really the only moment across his entire public record where he offered anything resembling acknowledgement of his rude actions. Still in the year of 2014, LTG challenged a former EVO champion named Viscount to a grudge match in Street Fighter 4 at Wednesday Night Fights. They played 10 games, and Viscount won all rounds against LTG. Now this footage pretty much circulated through the community, and LTG became a recurring punchline inside the fighting game community, having lost to Viscount and Broly Legs in embarrassing ways. Now he lost to Viscount again 2 years later in Street Fighter 5, and he later lost the match to a female player named Guilty. Now this defeat was even more embarrassing for LTG, because Guilty made a mistake mid-game and chose to give this round to LTG instead of restarting, and this allowance meant that LTG was 1 point ahead in their match, yet Guilty still came out victorious at the end of the game. Then 2016 arrived, and the Smash community handed him his next public humiliation, and he accepted LTG's open challenge and beat him cleanly. And in response, LTG posted a video he titled the Anti-Roast Track, in which he directed a stream of derogatory words at Anti.
You're the black guy that they would hire for demographics. Root from streets of race 3, had to dig inside my temporal lobe. Skin be the same color as a bowl of Cocoa Krispies though.
Now alongside this diss track, LTG also posted some salty tweets against Anti. In one thread, Low Tier God calls him the N-word, a roach, a fraud, and a gargoyle. And at one point he even attributed his loss to the fact that they played at 3 AM.
I don't need a bunch of idiots excited because a coward got lucky over 2 3:40 AM games. This overcooked Anti refused to play me again, just to have 2 false ass games over me at 3:40 AM because he's a coward. 2 games at 3:40 AM. I got so bodied. Lol, you people write so much, you can feel it in your throat.
And in the same thread, he asked for a rematch around a time that would make much more sense to him.
Someone tagged a Diddy Kong looking guy and tell him to run my setback. It's 10 AM and not 3:40 AM.
Now following this reaction, Low Tier God became somewhat of a laughingstock in the Smash community. Now people started calling him a low-income fraud, which I'll explain why later, and many were glad NT won the game. Now 2 years later, Twitch banned him for hateful conduct, so he moved to YouTube, where his content was then later demonetized, and his account eventually banned. But rather than stepping back from competitive gaming entirely, after suffering these losses, Low Tier God simply doubled down and entered the Smash Bros scene in 2019, and there he competed in the same community whose players he'd insulted 3 years earlier. But by 2021, users started to dig up on LTG's controversial past, regarding his 4-year relationship at the time. Now the timeline of this online interrogation was August 2018. During a live stream, a woman named Elena called Low Tier God in tears while he was streaming. The woman was his now ex-girlfriend, and she was upset because LTG had chosen to attend EVO over their 4th anniversary celebration. Now the problem was, LTG forgot to mute his microphone, so his viewers heard the entire conversation. The couple was marking 4 years together, which meant that their relationship had started in August of 2014, but screenshots from Elena's Instagram page confirmed she turned 25 in November of 2021, and this meant that their birth year was 1996. And after calculating the age gap, users discovered that back in August of 2014, Low Tier God was in his 30s, and Elena was at least 13 years younger than him. Now LTG never addressed the age gap publicly, and his silence gave way to an online mockery that would last for years afterwards. Now this clip of his livestream with Elena circulated, and the phrase
"she was 17 candles"
became a recurring tag that used to follow him across platforms.
She was 17, Dale. Here we go.
Still, Low Tier God didn't react or offer any explanation, but he became so hated in the gaming community that he got booed when he appeared on stage at the 2023 Stream Awards to present the award for Best Fighting Game Streamer.
Why do I hear boos? I hear a lot of boos.
And this viral moment is pinned on his TikTok account for all to see, along with some other self-glazing videos. Now he returned to Twitch in 2021, was banned again, and the cycle repeated. By 2024, he'd been banned from Twitch a total of 5 times. And still in the same year, Low Tier God faced another controversial issue. In July, a California lawyer operating under the name Meth Bear published court documents on X from the Superior Court of California, Los Angeles County, which revealed that Low Tier God had signed a voluntary declaration of parentage, which was a legal form through which a parent formally acknowledges a child. Now the document named him, Dale Emmanuel Wilson, as the parent and established a court-ordered monthly child support payment of $998. Now the child, whose identity was kept private, was 10 years old at the time of publication, and this document revealed that Low Tier God had a child somewhere that he wasn't acknowledging in public. Now this post gathered over 2 million views, while Low Tier God didn't deny it and only blocked the account. However, this revelation will lead to another discovery much later. In June of 2025, the child's mother, identified as Rose, addressed the matter on a livestream. She stated that Low Tier God was behind on his payments and owed $2,000 in unpaid child support. And as usual, LTG made no public response, which is why some people call him low-income fraud. As of now, Low Tier God operates a Twitch channel with close to 300,000 followers and a YouTube page with roughly 17,000 subscribers. Now no criminal charges are currently pending, and only the restraining order from 2005 and the criminal record from 2012 remain the confirmed legal actions on his record. Now Low Tier God's damage mostly lived in words and missed payments, and his worst moments pretty much are online. On the other hand, this next person didn't stop at words. It developed into a full mental cycle that threatened the lives of half the Smash community at large.
I turned right and I didn't kill anybody because it was not your night and it wasn't anybody's night.
It was November 25th, 2017. 20-year-old Jacob Johnson, or JK for short, was a top contender who'd ranked first on the Las Vegas Smash 4 power rankings, when he suddenly faced a halt in his competitive career. That night, a group of Smash players gathered at a local tournament venue in Las Vegas. Among them were Charlie Daking and Technicals, and after the tournament ended, JK approached the group and invited them to dinner at a restaurant. They declined though and headed toward the parking lot, and what happened next would permanently change JK's standing in the community. According to multiple witnesses, JK got into his vehicle and sped toward the group while they walked through the parking lot. Now the group barely managed to jump out of the way, and in response they immediately confronted JK, claiming that they knew it wasn't an accident. Now JK immediately admitted that he tried to hit them on purpose. He told them that he didn't care if the crash had killed him or any of them in the process. And so within 24 hours, Las Vegas tournament organizers banned JK from attending tournaments in the area indefinitely. And 2 days later, on November 27th, he issued a public apology. In a statement, he explained that he suffered from multiple mental illnesses such as chronic depression, ADHD, bipolar manic disorder, which may have been the reason why he acted that way.
I'm seeking help from a professional and have a psychiatric appointment. Sorry for all the stress I caused.
Now this was super random. Tournament organizer Sean Regan reviewed JK's apology and found it insufficient. JK hadn't directly addressed the people he tried to run over, or taken full responsibility for putting their lives at risk. Sean believed that JK never truly saw the need to.
We need to message every single part of the party that was involved in the incident 6 months ago.
Now at the end of his note, Sean confirmed that JK's indefinite ban would remain in place until he could prove that he was mentally in place. Now amidst these issues, JK was still held onto a strong belief that it was still safe for him to compete with other players and he shouldn't be banned.
And for me, I feel like I'm completely safe with everybody in this room.
However, he eventually stepped away from competitive Smash to focus on his treatment. JK stated that once he rehabilitated, he would return when the community felt comfortable with him attending tournaments again. And for 7 whole months, JK did stay away from competitive play. And during that time, he provided evidence of treatment to Las Vegas tournament organizers. And then on June 9th, 2018, the Las Vegas backroom held a meeting to determine whether JK was fit to return. And all parties voted unanimously to lift the ban. And with that, JK was suddenly back in the scene, although it wouldn't last long because some players were still not in support of the reinstatement. Among them was Technicals, one of the players JK almost ran over at the Las Vegas tournament in November 2017. You see, Technicals, as mentioned earlier, is a YouTuber who posts news and happenings around the Smash scene. And when JK's ban was lifted, he reacted to it on his channel on August 18, 2018. And he wasn't happy.
We're talking about whether, you know, he belongs, has he really changed, and was the Vegas community right for letting him back?
In response, JK posted an apology video the next day.
And it wasn't anybody's night. But you know what, Tech? I f***ed up your whole entire day, and I've put you in such a negative spiral, and I'm sorry. I f***ed up that whole day.
Still, the apology did nothing to change JK's situation, because by mid-September 2018, just 3 months after his reinstatement, JK was banned again for undisclosed reasons. Now, tournament organizers initially kept it private, until an incident in November led the panel to speak about the ban. On November 2nd, 2018, JK attended a local tournament at Games Nest Arcade, breaking the terms of his ban. Staff members asked him to leave, and many of the attendees were uncomfortable with his presence, and so questions circulated about his ban status. Now, due to this uproar, one of the officials by the name of Ivan or Navi Castillo released a statement 5 days later, and Navi explained that a public announcement could have been harmful to JK's well-being and mental health, so the ban was discussed privately with JK, and he agreed to distance himself from the community to seek additional professional help. Now, Navi reiterated that JK was still permanently banned from all Las Vegas Smash events, and organizers were urged to adhere to take note. However, this is when things started to take an ugly turn after his publication. JK began sending messages to other players. On November 13th, Jordan, or Lisan, received a Twitter direct message from JK, which read,
"Next time I see you, I'm going to shoot you in the mouth."
JK also threatened to blow up Jordan's grandfather's house, and multiple other players in the Las Vegas scene received similar threatening messages. Now, the recipients of these threats contacted Nevada law enforcement immediately, and the authorities took JK into custody the following day. Now, threats of this kind were taken very seriously, especially during this particular time. Just 3 months earlier, for example, in August 2018, a gunman had opened fire at a Madden NFL 19 tournament in Jacksonville, Florida, killing 2 competitors. The shooter, David Katz, or Brett, had returned to the venue with a gun after losing a match. And so esports events across the globe had tightened security in response. And with someone as unstable as JK running wild, the Smash community had to act smart and fast. Now, national tournament organizer Bear spoke publicly about the situation. He revealed that in September 2018, community leaders held an intervention with JK after learning that he'd attempted to voluntarily leave the earth multiple times, and that they'd done everything they could to keep him safe, while keeping the community safe as well. But the threats changed the calculation entirely, and so on November 14th, it was confirmed that JK was in custody with authorities. He received a lifetime ban from his local competitive scene, and as of now, details of any criminal charges or convictions have not been made public. But JK's socials remain frozen in time. But this next one led to eventual losses, figuratively and literally.
The King County Sheriff's Office, they are investigating this as second-degree murder, and a warning to our viewers, some of the details in this story may be disturbing to some.
Now the name Swedes meant something in the Pacific Northwest Smash scene. It was the name 29-year-old Colin Bolditoir went by online. Now Colin was a regular at Seattle's satellite Smash tournaments. Players in a local community knew him and competed with him at small events. But on June 29, 2022, Colin's name became attached to one of the most horrifying crimes in Washington's Smash community. The story starts with Colin's mother, 70-year-old Lori Collins, who lived in an apartment complex in Shoreline, Washington. It was a residential, quiet place just north of Seattle. Now Lori worked at Seattle Pacific University for over 3 decades as a budget manager in the School of Theology, and colleagues described her as loyal and someone whose faith showed in her work. And for 30 years, she showed up and left on time, consistently. Now Colin had been living with Lori despite a court order that explicitly prohibited it, because in May of 2022, Lori filed a no-contact order against him following a domestic violence incident. The instructions were simple and clear. Colin was to have no direct or indirect contact with his mother, no phone calls, no electronic communication, and he wasn't even supposed to be within 1,000 feet of her residence. But despite this, Colin was living in her apartment, sleeping under the same roof as the woman who'd filed the order to keep him away. Then came the early hours of Wednesday morning on June 29, 2022. A neighbor heard screaming from Lori's apartment at 2 a.m. and this loud noise was followed by thumping sounds. And hours later, the same neighbor noticed another strange thing. Lori's car was still in its assigned parking spot during hours where she would have been at work. And these were so concerning that the neighbors had to call for a welfare check. Now King County deputies arrived at Lori's property at around 9 a.m. They knocked and Colin actually opened the door, saw them, and then shut it immediately. Now minutes passed and he opened it again, but this time he stepped outside and locked the door behind him. Now the deputies knew about the protective order and wanted to speak with Lori to understand why her son was standing at her doorway and not her. So they asked Colin where his mother was and he told them that she was at work, but they weren't convinced because Lori's car was of course still in the parking lot. So the officers changed the topic and asked about the screaming and thumping sounds the neighbor had reported, and Colin said that he'd had an argument with Lori and it happened all the time, but they still weren't convinced. So the deputies tried calling Lori by phone, but of course there was no reply. So they simply forced their way in, and in the bedroom upstairs the officers did find Lori, but not in the way they expected. Her body wasn't connected and a baseball bat rested just a few feet away. Now the officers arrested Colin at the scene and charged him with second-degree murder, and within 24 hours the Western Washington Smash scene learned what happened. And so of course Satellite Smash, local tournament organizer, issued a permanent ban for Colin. And while many supported the ban, of course, others actually posted comments asking why Colin still couldn't compete and when he'd start streaming again. Now regardless of the diverse reactions, the Western Washington Smash panel encouraged anyone affected to reach out to local mental health support services. Meanwhile, Seattle Pacific University released a statement in honor of Lori, which read,
"The university is deeply saddened by the death of our longtime and treasured Colin. She was a loyal and dedicated assistant for many departments. She will be profoundly missed by the SPU community."
And further investigations revealed more testimonies from neighbors. And according to these reports, Lori and Colin had ongoing issues, including mental health struggles, and the no contact order the elderly mother had filed in May indicated that those issues had escalated to violence and that she wanted to protect herself. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. As of now, there aren't any updates regarding Colin's case, and the details of what happened that night remain unknown. He remains in King County Jail on a $2 million bail though.